Hey, this is Aaron Perlut, founding partner of Elasticity, and I am joined by Sarah Kogod, who is Elasticity's Vice President of Strategy. Sarah, what is up?
How are you?
I am great. I am great, but we need to talk about something that's important. I know it's near and dear to your heart because you have done a ton of work over the breadth of your career in this space, and that is Pride Month. Because I know you've done a lot of advising with different types of brands, some that might even surprise you as it relates to partnerships with the LGBTQIA plus community. And so, I know we were talking earlier about how people always put this in sports terms like wins, losses, and things like that, but
Mhm.
when it comes to Pride Month, I think, you kind of look at it much differently.
Yeah, so one of the first things I advise when we're talking to a brand about how to approach inclusion in general, but we're talking specifically Pride Month, is when you approach your activations, that you're doing it from a business standpoint and not just from an advocacy standpoint. Because when you're approaching it from a business standpoint, then your advocacy will have more value because it is aligning with your business goals. You're staying true to who you are as an organization while also actively serving the community you're trying to reach with whatever it is that you're doing.
Yeah, so I mean, essentially, you are of the belief that you need to look at any participation in Pride Month like you would in any other, say, charitable or nonprofit engagement uh, as a business function, right?
Absolutely. I think, one of the first things when people start looking at what they can do for Pride, they say, well, what is our budget? And the answer is, well, your budget is your advertising budget. It's your product development budget. It's your customer retention budget. It's your employee retention budget. It's your HR budget. It's all of those things. When you start siloing any of these activations as charity or as a gift or as a favor to a community and take it outside of that business function, then you're not thinking of it in terms of longevity, right? So when we want to do something and we want to make an impact, we want that impact to last and we want to be able to continue doing it. And if you're not looking at it as a business function, you're not building in those support systems that allow you year after year to build and grow these things that you're doing. It also risks being inauthentic because you're approaching it one time, flash in the pan, what are we going to do? And then you set it aside until May of the following year when you start thinking about what are we going to do? And then you think about it again the next year rather than continuously around thinking about engaging those audiences authentically. So that way, when you do activate in a bigger way, that audience is already engaged with you and you are not giving that impression that you're just here for 1 month and then we'll see you next year kind of thing.
It's almost like some companies that they on Earth Day they rush to announce how many pounds of paper they recycled that year without
Mhm.
actually thinking, is this part of our platform? Do we want to have a platform of sustainability? Is this part of our brand? And then just jump into something because they feel like they have to, not because they're thinking about, does this make smart business sense for us?
Absolutely. I think it also risks looking as if you're throwing smoke and mirrors at who you actually are. So when you are doing something, again, whether it's for Earth Week or whether it's for Pride Month or any activation, and you're focusing so hard on the impact you're making in that one moment, it just appears like you're trying to distract from the fact that you are not actually committed to that community or to that cause. And I want to say that is okay. If you as an organization have not made a certain thing your priority, it doesn't align with who you are as a business, you have taken a stand in a specific way that doesn't necessarily align with Pride Month, it's okay. But understand the more you try to focus on those activities in 1 month, the more it's going to highlight what you're not doing for the rest of the year. And so I encourage brands when they are approaching these things to scale what they're doing appropriately on how well they're committed for the rest of the year. So if you're super committed to the LGBTQIA community year round, go as big as you can for Pride because you have nothing to hide. If you are not making that commitment, then consider your approach a little more subtle. And that allows you to maintain that authenticity while really deciding as an organization, is this a stance that you want to grow? Or is this something you want to market in that month and then continue your regular marketing activities for the rest of the year?
Now that's a perfect segue, and I think we'd be remiss if we didn't kind of dive into this a little bit at least into the fiasco around Bud Light, because what a
Mm,
lot of people don't know is that they have historically done a lot of support more on a local and regional level for Pride Month. And this
yeah.
year, This year they got involved with, creating a can for a TikTok influencer, and
Hmm.
it blew up with Kid Rock firing some gun of some sort at some Bud Light, and it became viral within conservative media. Um, uh, Tell me through the lens through which you kind of watch that unfold.
Uh, it was certainly a roller coaster ride. Um, so we take things in the grain of, again, looking at it at a business function. And I think back to Nike and the Colin Kaepernick, support of Colin Kaepernick. These things don't happen at that level as a knee jerk reaction. A bunch of people sit in a room and they crunch the numbers and they think, what should our approach be? How should we approach the situation? Does it make sense from a business standpoint and financial standpoint? And when those numbers make sense, they're throwing their full support. In this situation, there was a marketing effort to engage an audience that they have not typically engaged with before. And the number one rule when you're trying to engage a new audience is to understand your existing audience. Because if you understand your existing audience, you can predict any fallout, pushback, crisis communications that may come with engaging a different audience. I think that was the one thing that maybe Bud Light missed a step, right? Not that they don't understand their existing audience, but they didn't consider their existing audience in this new engagement. And that doesn't mean you don't do it. It means understanding your existing audience and considering that prepares you for fallout and pushback. Because they missed that step when the pushback happened, they were caught off guard and they were not adequately prepared to respond to that. And in reality, the goodwill that they were building, the new audience that they had engaged was building. Their previous audience was falling, but you also have to look historically at what happens in these situations. When you lose audience like that, it's not permanent. There is a temporary drop. And then something else happens somewhere else. They get distracted. That audience comes back, right? And so what Bud Light did was saw the fallout, panicked, pulled back, and immediately lost all of the audience that they had built with that one activation. And in context, this wasn't a massive campaign. This wasn't a billboard. This was a partnership with one influencer, right?
As a one-off.
So it was a one-off. It was a one-off. And not that when you are responding to fallout, you say, "Yeah, well, this was just a one-off," because you're still minimizing what you just did. Um, but when you start responding to pushback that quickly and full retreat, that just weakens your brand as well. And the full retreat, I think, did so much more damage than the initial fallout from the partnership.
Well, and also
Um,
it elongated the story because, and
yeah.
what you and I are talking about is that for those who aren't aware, they relieved two marketing executives of their roles that were leading the
Hmm.
charge, and that sent a message to the LGBTQIA plus community that, oh, we made a mistake. We can't be
Hmm.
supporting your community, uh, in spite of the fact that they are supporting Pride Week efforts or Pride Month efforts rather, and
Yeah.
it made the news cycle of the story even longer, and it made you wonder what they truly, if they know what they stand for as an organization and as a brand, and if I'm like a prospective employer thinking about going to work for InBev, I'm like, wow, if I come up with a creative concept and want to try to reach a new audience, if it doesn't work or if there's any criticism of it, I'll get my ass thrown right out the door.
Hmm.
I mean, to your point, I thought the retreat cause, it was so problematic in so many ways. Um, it was very disappointing to me because they've always been a pretty universal brand in the organization, and we know the organization well. We've worked with the organization on several brands. It's been it was a little disappointing, but it'll be interesting to see what they come with next. I imagine it's going to be a very like pro America, we stand for American values kind of thing. Because normally when you behave in the way they did, there's going to be a long term kind of attempt to support that reaction.
Yeah, I think they have to be careful when we look at situations like with Target, Target's Pride line, which has been a thing for years. This year, with social media, with the political climate, with emboldened by things like the Bud Light situation, where you have a group of people that decided to push back against a thing so violently that it then creates more power behind the things that they're pushing back. And so Target in some of their stores had to pull their Pride March to the back of the store. And when we look at that sort of retreat, it's not a retreat. For Target, they were protecting staff members who were getting death threats, people who were threatening to come into Target and shoot up the place. And so we have to be careful as we're looking at how companies respond to backlash, whether in the Bud Light case where it was they felt it was damage control, they did more damage in the damage control, or Target where they have to make a decision in order to secure the safety of their employees because of the same group of people. And so the companies that are reacting to these instances of pushback, sometimes massively violent pushback, is very independent to each organization. And sometimes you may think it's the wrong thing, sometimes it's the right thing. We're looking at employee safety. I think that has to be, factored in the case of Target for sure.
So you and I had a really interesting conversation last week. We were talking about the NHL made the announcement that they were going to be getting rid of their Pride warm-up jerseys, and the timing obviously could have been better. They could have waited
Mhm.
until after Pride Month to do that. But you had a really interesting reaction to it. It wasn't what I had expected. Talk about that a little bit. What you thought when you saw that situation unfold.
So there's a couple of things, right? I think that people need to understand as we're looking at this. And I've done work with the NHL on Pride activations. I've done work with most leagues on Pride activations, so I know how it works. The NHL doesn't oversee Pride activations across the entire league. Every individual team decides on their own what they are going to do for Pride. We are now up to 32, all 32 teams having some presence in Pride. That was not always the case. It was up to each individual team what they were going to do, how they were going to go about it, who they were going to partner with, if anybody. And it remains that case today. And looking into how this came about, because you're right, making an announcement during Pride Month would have been foolish. They didn't actually do that. They did an interview where they mentioned that they were pulling back on recommending to individual teams that they do Pride warm-up jerseys. And that turned into the NHL is doing away with Pride jerseys. And so we have to be careful. We talk about our advocacy, and we have to be careful when we look at how these situations come up and the language around them and the narrative that we build, where all of a sudden it was a recommendation to not do it instead of a mandate to not do it. There's a big difference there. However, the recommendation to not do it is also newsworthy. And I will tell you the story. I've told you the story before. When I was advising minor league baseball on their Pride campaign, and the year we launched that campaign, there was 150 teams, minor league baseball teams. We did 72 Pride games. And part of the way I approached it was we would advise individual teams based on their audience, their demographic, where they were in the country, whether they had done Pride previously or not. And there was a team that came to me and said they wanted to do a practice jersey. They wanted to do a Pride practice jersey, but they knew that they had 3 players on the roster that would not wear them, that would actively refuse to wear them. And I said to them, well, then don't do a Pride jersey. Let's find another way for you to activate. Because if you want to do something and you know that 3 players on our roster are going to actively refuse, you're just building a crisis rather than supporting the community. And then you're putting the community you're trying to support at the center of that crisis. And so this is very similar to that, where if you know that you have players on your roster that won't wear a Pride practice jersey, do something else, right? And that is a valid advocacy position, because you're not putting the community you're trying to help at the center of a violent controversy. That is a business decision, because you are trying to run a club in the most efficient and effective way possible. And it's also a financial decision, because when you're looking at the things that you do as an organization and what the ROI is, and the ROI doesn't always have to be money, right? But there should be some return on that investment. If it's not balancing out, you need to find another way. And so I don't disagree with the recommendation to teams that if you know that having a Pride practice jersey is going to create controversy, then find another way to support the community, because that's much more effective for them.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. So, all right. as I mentioned earlier, where we're kind of wrapping towards the end of Pride Month here,
Mhm.
what have you seen that you've been like, huh, this has been like that has interested you, that you found to be pretty cool, interesting activations, engagements, campaigns, what have you?
So I'll be honest with you, this year, I think a lot of people were afraid to do anything that was so unique and so outside the box. I did not see a lot this year that was different, or that was really pushing the envelope. Um, and so this year, from a pride perspective, I don't really have a lot of examples that I could lean on and say, hey, this was a really cool thing that they did. Um, and that to me is sort of where we're headed with Pride, where we're looking at finding ways to support the community more authentically rather than making these big rainbow filled Pride activations in June. I will say that the LGBTQIA community has a buying power of $1 trillion. It's been valued at $1 trillion in this country. And so finding ways to engage that audience outside of Pride and during Pride authentically is really crucial for all of these brands.
Yeah,
It's
and
crucial.
that also goes with a lot of other large and growing minorities like
Mhm,
Hispanics in the US. Hispanics in the US are have a huge buying power. They actually out index white Americans on digital use,
mhm.
phone use, and the buying power is significant. And it's why brands need to kind of rethink how they're engaging what they perceive to be minority groups, but are really
Mhm.
significant channels for buying opportunities for their products and services.
Yeah, so one of the things I always say is don't market to demographics, market to behaviors. And one of the earliest examples is, I mean, gosh, 20 years ago when the big push to market to women in sports happened. And we used to joke and we used to call it shrink it and pink it because brands would make something smaller and pink, and that was how they marketed to women, right? And if someone comes to me and says, "Hey, how do we market to women?" I say, "What? Which women? Right? Which women are you marketing to? How do we market to the LGBTQ community? Which part of the community, right? Who are you marketing to? Because there isn't one answer. It's the same thing with Hispanic marketing. There is this, the equivalent of shrink it and pink it is put it in Spanish, and that's how you're marketing to the Hispanic community. Well, that's not it. That's just translating something into a different language,
It's the
right?
lowest common
You need
denominator too, and
it's the lowest common denominator, and you brag about it and say we market to the Hispanic community because our ads are bilingual. That's not it, right? You need to understand communities and understand the behavior, and those behaviors, the Venn diagram of behaviors overlaps a lot. So you may find that you're trying to market to a demographic that you already have the ability to market to, but you're assuming that behaviors are so different because they happen to be in a different demographic. You're completely missing the point. And so when we stop trying to market to specific demographics and start marketing to behaviors, you're going to organically reach a whole new audience because you're looking at them holistically rather than as different subsets of people that want different things and need different things all the time.
Sarah Kogod, our Elasticity Vice President of Strategy. I extend you a virtual fist bump because I
Mm,
invented the fist bump.
done.
This has been good talking about Pride. We're going to do it again, okay?
Anytime.